Some men say they killed for love, others say it was heartbreak. But these 5 didn't cry, beg, or walk away. They sharpened their rage, bottled their betrayal, and turned the women they once adored into corpses. Jealousy wasn't a symptom, it was the motive. Whether it was a hidden affair, a whispered lie, or just the fear of losing control, these men made sure the ones who hurt them never got the chance to leave. Before I tell you how these 5 men turned betrayal into blood, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And don't forget to subscribe, because in these stories, the last thing she said became the last thing she ever said. Chris Coleman didn't stab in a moment of rage or shoot in a fit of panic. He strangled with intention, quietly, silently, one by one, in the dark. He was a man with everything to lose: a cushy job as head of security for Joyce Meyer Ministries, a polished image in a conservative Christian community, and a beautiful wife and 2 sons who saw him as their protector. But Chris didn't want that life anymore. He wanted freedom. Specifically, he wanted to be with Tara Lintz, a woman he met through family friends in Florida. Blonde, seductive, and free of responsibility. He was obsessed. They began a full-blown affair, and Chris promised her he'd leave his wife. But divorce would have meant disgrace. Joyce Meyer Ministries had strict moral clauses. If he admitted to cheating, he'd lose everything. So instead of leaving Sherry, he decided to erase her. But Chris couldn't just kill her. He had to make it look like someone else did. That's when the fake death threats began. Emails from a made-up stalker. Crude, menacing messages sent to the ministry, to himself, even to Sherry. He used a Yahoo account tied to his own IP address. He wrote them in capital letters, disguising his grammar, threatening harm to the family if Joyce Meyer didn't shut up. It was cover. He told the police they were being targeted. He installed a home security system and told friends he feared for their lives. It was all part of the setup. For weeks, he laid the foundation. Then, early on May 5, 2009, he executed the plan. He waited until after midnight when his wife Sherry and their sons Gavin and Garrett were asleep. He crept room to room in silence. No gun, no knife, just a ligature, likely a rope or cord he prepared in advance. He started with Sherry. Forensic evidence showed she was strangled in her sleep. No signs of struggle, indicating she never saw it coming. He applied pressure slowly, methodically, long enough to crush her airway but leave no deep external trauma. It was precise, controlled. When she stopped breathing, he moved to the boys, 9-year-old Garrett and 11-year-old Gavin, each killed in the same manner, manual ligature strangulation. No screams, no fight, just stillness. They trusted their father. They didn't resist. He murdered them in cold silence, making sure there was no noise to wake the others. The medical examiner later testified the boys likely died in a state of confusion, in their beds, their faces still relaxed when death took them. When it was done, Chris left their bodies where they lay. No attempt to hide them. He wanted them found. He staged it as a home invasion. He wrote "punished" in red spray paint on the wall, like the killer was sending a message. Then he left for the gym, just like any other morning. At 6:43 a.m., he texted a cop friend, asking him to check on the house because his wife wasn't answering. At 6:56, police entered the home and found the scene exactly how he'd left it. Chris arrived moments later, pretending to be shocked, but the details began unraveling quickly. There was no sign of forced entry. The windows were locked, the doors unbroken. The security system showed no tripped alarms, and the handwriting on the spray paint matched samples of Chris's own notes. His timeline didn't hold up. Gym check-ins were off. Surveillance footage showed inconsistencies, and his phone logs showed he was texting Tara throughout the early morning, even as his family lay dead. Autopsy reports nailed the time of death around 3 a.m., hours before his alibi began. His cover story collapsed. Then came the digital forensics. The emails threatening Joyce Meyer, all traced to an account created on Chris's laptop using his home Wi-Fi. The grammar style matched his old Army emails. He didn't use a VPN. He didn't spoof his location. He assumed the story would hold, but it didn't. Every message was his. His devices stored drafts. IP logs showed they were sent from inside his home. When confronted, Chris denied it until police showed that his mistress Tara had received a plane ticket from him just weeks before the murders. He had booked a flight for her to move in. His emails to her promised freedom. "It'll all be over soon," he wrote. He said he'd file for divorce, but then he changed his plan. Faster, cleaner, permanent. And that's why, when police showed up at his door, Chris didn't run. He thought the lie was enough, but the bodies weren't hidden. The crime wasn't messy. It was quiet. Too quiet. A man killing his whole family without leaving the bed, without waking the neighbors, without blood. The officers said it was like walking into a wax museum. Stillness. No forced entry. No burglary. Just 3 people murdered in their sleep by someone they knew, someone they trusted. The only person who walked out alive. And when the judge finally asked him if he had anything to say, Chris stared straight ahead, as if the performance hadn't ended, as if the act wasn't over. But the courtroom wasn't a stage. It was the grave he dug for himself. One lie, one ligature, one fake email at a time. When detectives finally placed Chris Coleman under arrest, there wasn't a fight, no yelling, no denial, just a quiet, almost smug resignation in his face, as if he believed the performance could still be saved. Even as the handcuffs clicked shut, his posture stayed firm, his shirt pressed, hair combed, like he was walking into another church service instead of a murder trial. The courtroom would later become the final stage in a deception he had rehearsed for months, but this time, he had no control over the script. Prosecutors laid out everything: the fake emails, the staged crime scene, the text messages to his mistress, and most damning of all, the timeline. It betrayed him more than any witness. Phone pings placed him at home long after he claimed he'd left for the gym. Surveillance from the gym contradicted his check-in time. He had no workout log, no camera footage showing him arriving when he said he did. But most devastating was the autopsy. All 3 victims had died hours before Chris claimed to have left. The bruising patterns around their necks were consistent with ligature strangulation from a soft rope or fabric. Not a random attacker's frenzy, but a killer who knew what he was doing. There were no defensive wounds, no broken furniture, no overturned tables, just still bodies in beds, smothered silently, methodically. The prosecution argued that Chris chose strangulation because it left no blood, no cleanup. He knew that a knife or gun would leave a mess, a trace. He wanted clean death, quick, controlled, and the spray-painted "punished" on the wall, sloppily applied with lines that matched paint cans found in his garage. The color, exact match. The nozzle, with his fingerprint. He hadn't even worn gloves. His emails to Joyce Meyer Ministries, supposedly from the stalker, were another fatal mistake. Typed from a Yahoo account made at his house during hours when he was alone. Metadata showed the browser history, the IP address, even drafts saved by the email client. He tried to disguise the writing with blocky language and spelling errors, but investigators matched the cadence and wording to prior emails he'd sent while in the military. He left a trail of digital DNA, and if that wasn't enough, his mistress, Tara Lintz, testified. She told the jury that Chris promised her a future, that he would fix everything. She thought he meant divorce. She didn't know he meant death. The jury was shown email chains where Chris told Tara he had already picked out a condo for them. One message read, "Sherry won't be a problem soon." Another said, "We'll be together by May." Sherry was killed on May 5th. The implications were undeniable. Chris had a motive, a plan, a timeline, and a clean execution. What he didn't have was a way out. The courtroom itself was divided. On one side, Joyce Meyer's ministry, red-faced and humiliated that their top security man had become a cold-blooded killer. On the other, Sherry's family, stunned and shattered. Her father couldn't look at Chris without shaking. Her sister broke down when describing how much Sherry had tried to hold the marriage together, how she had no idea she was sleeping beside a man rehearsing her murder. The final blow came from the children's autopsy photos. The medical examiner testified that both Gavin and Garrett had slight petechial hemorrhaging, broken blood vessels in the eyes and face, consistent with prolonged strangulation. They may have briefly awakened. They may have seen their father, but they didn't scream. They trusted him. That trust was their death sentence. When asked about this detail, Chris showed no reaction, no twitch, no tear, just a blank, practiced face, like a man still playing the role he wrote for himself. On May 5, 2011, exactly 2 years after the murders, Chris Coleman was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. The judge called it one of the most calculated family annihilations he had ever seen. Chris was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. No appeal, no deals, just a cage. But even in prison, Chris's behavior remained eerily consistent. Guards reported that he rarely showed emotion. He stayed organized, quiet, almost militaristic in his routine. He refused interviews, wrote no apologies. When asked by an inmate if he killed his kids, Chris allegedly replied, "I didn't kill them, I set them free." Those words, if true, reveal the most chilling aspect of all, that he still saw himself as a victim, that he believed what he did was necessary, not evil, not monstrous, just necessary. His motive had never been rage, it had been erasure. He didn't want revenge. He wanted reinvention. Sherry was in the way. The kids were collateral, and the future he imagined with his mistress required a fresh start, one he tried to create by eliminating every loose end tied to his old life. But murder isn't deletion. It leaves scars. It leaves data. And in this case, it left 3 bodies perfectly preserved in their own home, untouched but destroyed, while the man who killed them tried to spin it into a fable. Chris never disappeared. He never ran. He thought the story would protect him. But what he never understood was that in real life, there are no rewrites, only consequences. And when the curtain finally dropped, there was no applause, only silence. The silence of a house that would never hear laughter again. The silence of a family wiped out in their sleep. The silence of a killer who still won't admit why he really did it, because deep down, he doesn't think it was wrong. If Chris Coleman showed us how calm a man can be while killing the people who trusted him most, then the next man on this list proves just how far someone will go to make sure betrayal is punished publicly. This one didn't hide in a lie. He filmed everything, rage, blood, even his escape. And when he pressed record, he wasn't trying to go viral. He was documenting a crime he believed the world needed to see. Kevin Jansen Neal wasn't supposed to be anywhere near a weapon. By the time he murdered his wife, he was already out on bail, already under a restraining order, and already banned from owning firearms due to a string of violent incidents with neighbors in his remote community of Rancho Tehama, California. But court orders don't mean much to men like Kevin, not when they're unraveling. And by the time he snapped, he wasn't thinking like a criminal trying to avoid punishment. He was thinking like a man who had decided the story was already over. But before he waged war on strangers, Kevin began with the one person closest to him, his wife, Barbara. She had once defended him, covered for him, helped him hide when police came knocking. But now, neighbors said she seemed afraid of him, quiet, withdrawn, trying to disappear. She had started talking to people Kevin didn't like, and for Kevin, that was enough to justify what came next. On the night of November 13th, 2017, in their modest trailer home shaded by trees and surrounded by fence wire and paranoia, Kevin retrieved a homemade rifle, illegal, unregistered, and hand-built from parts bought online. He loaded it with care. Barbara was in the kitchen making dinner. Police believe she never saw it coming. He shot her twice, both bullets striking her torso. She dropped instantly. He stood over her and fired again, one final shot to the head. No screaming, no struggle, just silence. Then, without panic, Kevin dragged her body across the floor and began tearing up sections of the floorboards. Over the next several hours, he dismembered her. The exact tools he used were never confirmed, but the scene showed marks consistent with a circular saw or reciprocating blade. Jagged, uneven cuts that turned a body into puzzle pieces. He wrapped her limbs in tarps and plastic bags, soaked the area with bleach, and placed her remains beneath the floor of the bedroom, sealing it back with nailed planks and weighted furniture. Her blood had soaked into the floorboards. But Kevin didn't care. That night, he didn't flee. He didn't hide. He slept in the same trailer on top of the woman he'd just executed. Police would later find her decomposing beneath their bed. The next morning, he packed his homemade arsenal, at least 4 illegal firearms, including 2 semi-automatic rifles he built himself, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, and a tactical vest. But before he left, he wrote a note, one that would later be found soaked in sweat and dirt at the bottom of his vest. "They all turned against me, but they won't forget me." The day wasn't about escape, it was about punishment. For neighbors, for strangers, for anyone he believed had wronged him. But it all started with Barbara. She wasn't cheating, she wasn't leaving, she was just living too quietly, and that to Kevin was betrayal enough. Kevin Jansen Neal began his rampage just after sunrise on November 14th, 2017. Wearing a black tactical vest stuffed with ammunition and carrying 2 illegally assembled AR-15 style rifles, he stepped outside his rural home and took one last look at the trailer where his wife's dismembered corpse was hidden beneath the bedroom floorboards. It was the final silence before the noise. He climbed into his white pickup truck and drove slowly down the gravel road, not racing, not hiding, just moving with deadly certainty. His first stop was a neighbor's house, the same neighbor who had filed complaints against him for shooting guns at all hours of the night, threatening people, and causing chaos in the community. Kevin got out of the truck and opened fire through the front window of their home. 2 were killed instantly. Then he drove further into the neighborhood, spraying bullets at random cars, firing into moving traffic, targeting homes where he believed people conspired against him. But none of it felt random to Kevin. Every shot was personal. Every target, in his mind, had betrayed him. He used his modified rifles with speed and precision, slamming loaded magazines into the receiver, flipping from house to house, sometimes getting back in the truck to reposition, sometimes walking calmly along the road as panicked 911 calls flooded dispatch. One witness said Kevin looked like a soldier, but there was no uniform, no ideology, just a man playing out a delusion soaked in blood. At 8 a.m., he reached Rancho Tehama Elementary School. He rammed the gates with his truck, got out, and started firing at windows and classrooms. He shot through the doors, trying to gain entry. Miraculously, the school had gone into lockdown seconds earlier. Teachers had rushed students into closets and under desks. Kevin's bullets hit walls, shattered glass, grazed one child, but no one was killed inside the school. Frustrated, he turned back and opened fire on a passing vehicle, killing a mother and injuring her child. Then he returned to the road and kept going. He left behind shell casings, shattered windows, and dead bodies scattered across 6 different crime scenes. Police had received more than 100 calls in under 45 minutes. A helicopter was deployed. Patrol cars closed in. Kevin never stopped. He didn't speak. He didn't negotiate. He just kept shooting. By the time he reached the end of his spree, he had killed 5 people and wounded 18, not counting the woman he butchered the night before. When deputies finally located his truck near an intersection, they rammed him off the road. Kevin exited with his rifle in hand, ready for a final standoff. But before officers could engage, he turned the gun on himself and pulled the trigger. 1 shot, 1 end. And just like that, it was over. Inside the truck, police found more weapons, more ammo, more plans. Back at his home, they discovered the grisly scene beneath the floor, the hacked remains of Barbara Neal, sealed under the boards with plastic, bleach, and cold intention. The forensic report concluded she had been dead for over 24 hours before the rampage. Kevin had killed her first, not out of passion, but as a matter of priority. In his eyes, she had betrayed him by staying quiet, by no longer defending him, by becoming one more ghost in his world of imagined enemies. Her death was the opening act in a performance he had been scripting for months. Homemade rifles, hand-drawn maps, notes to himself, lists of names, all stored in the home like trophies. No manifesto, no group affiliation, just a man who saw murder as clarity. And in the end, he made sure no one else would speak for him. No trial, no testimony, just silence. The same silence he left his wife in, 1 floor beneath his bed. Kevin Neal made sure no one could question him, not the police, not the courts, not even the woman he buried beneath the floor. But the next man didn't disappear. He stood in front of cameras. He gave interviews. He played the victim, the broken man, the grieving partner. And for weeks, the world believed him. Until the evidence spoke louder than his tears and revealed what really happened behind the bathroom door. Scott Peterson didn't cry when his wife went missing. He didn't panic. He didn't fall apart. He told reporters he was hopeful, that Laci had probably just gone for a walk, that she would be home soon. But behind the soft voice and folded hands was a man who had already killed her and was now selling a performance so convincing even her parents believed him at first. To the world, Laci Peterson was a radiant, full-term pregnant woman who had vanished on Christmas Eve 2002 without a trace. But to Scott, she was in the way of his freedom, in the way of the affair he was having with a massage therapist named Amber Frey, a woman who believed he was single, childless, and emotionally available. Scott told Amber he had lost his wife, and this would be his first Christmas without her, even though Laci was still alive at the time he said it. That lie was the first glimpse into his mind. He had already removed Laci emotionally. All that remained was the physical act. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Scott had made strange purchases: a small aluminum boat, an anchor mold, cement mix. He had conducted online searches for tides, currents, and boat launches along the San Francisco Bay. He had been planning not just a murder, but a disposal, one that would leave no room for survival or discovery. On the night of December 23rd, the couple supposedly watched TV, ate pizza, and exchanged small talk. Laci was 8 months pregnant with their son, Connor. She was glowing, exhausted, and trusting. She spoke with her mother on the phone that night, no sign of distress. But investigators believe that shortly after that call, somewhere between bedtime and sunrise, Scott either suffocated or strangled her. There were no defensive wounds, no blood, no signs of a break-in or struggle. Experts suggest he likely attacked while she slept, pinning her down, cutting off her airway. Quiet, quick, final. Then he wrapped her body in a tarp or sheet and placed her into the back of his truck, covered by umbrellas and tools. Early the next morning, while neighbors were still asleep, Scott loaded up his fishing gear and drove 90 miles west to the Berkeley Marina. There, he launched the small aluminum boat into the bay, alone, no witnesses, no GPS. He had brought with him homemade cement anchors, evidence later recovered in his warehouse, where one was missing from the mold lineup. He likely tied the anchors to her limbs, weighing her down before slipping her into the dark water. Cold, silent, gone. At 10:18 a.m., Scott made a phone call to Laci's voicemail. "Hey, beautiful. It's 10:18. I'm leaving Berkeley. I'll see you at home." It was staged, a time-stamped alibi. But when he arrived home, the dog was out, the house was empty, exactly how he had left it. That afternoon, he made casual calls, ran errands, even washed the truck. Later, he would play the role of concerned husband, calling police, printing posters, making pleas on national television. But what the public didn't know was that police were already suspicious. His affect was off. He was too calm, too rehearsed. Investigators began tracking his movements. And then, Amber Frey came forward. She had heard about Laci on the news and realized the man she had been dating was the man in the headlines. She contacted police. She agreed to record all future calls. What followed was weeks of Scott telling Amber he loved her, while police listened. He never mentioned Laci, never mentioned the unborn child, just fantasy, charm, and future plans. Meanwhile, forensics searched the boat, the truck, the warehouse. There was no blood, but there were chemical traces of cement. The homemade anchor molds matched the width of ligature marks later found on the recovered torso. But for months, the water kept her hidden, until April 2003, when a decomposed baby's body washed up on the Richmond shoreline. One day later, a woman's torso surfaced nearby. It was Laci. Her limbs were missing, her head was gone, but the DNA was conclusive. She had been cut open, either from decomposition or deliberate mutilation. But there was no question. She had been dumped. She didn't walk away. She didn't run. She had been placed into the water, and the tide finally gave her back. Police moved fast. They located Scott in La Jolla, California, near the Mexican border. He was driving a car registered to his brother, had dyed his hair blonde, grown a goatee, and carried $15,000 in cash, camping gear, a shovel, multiple cell phones, and his brother's driver's license. He said he was going golfing. The lies had run out. His wife was dead. His unborn son, gone. And the only thing left was the act of fleeing. But justice was waiting. When the cuffs finally closed around Scott Peterson's wrists on April 18, 2003, he didn't scream or collapse. He barely blinked. Sitting in his silver Mercedes with a duffel bag of cash, multiple burner phones, Viagra pills, and a license that wasn't his, he looked less like a grieving husband and more like a man preparing for a long, hot vanishing act. Investigators called it what it was, an attempted escape. And when news broke that he'd been arrested near the Mexican border, the public snapped. All sympathy evaporated. What was once a hopeful man in front of cameras became the centerpiece of America's most watched trial. The courtroom filled daily. Prosecutors built their case brick by brick. They had no murder weapon, no full-body autopsy, no eyewitness. But what they had was damning. Motive, deception, and overwhelming circumstantial evidence. They opened with Amber Frey, the mistress. She took the stand, composed, clear, and devastating. The jury heard Scott tell her, on tape, that this would be his first Christmas without his wife, while Laci was still alive. They listened to him describe a future with her, lies layered over more lies. They saw receipts, the boat, the cement, the route to the marina. They saw the GPS history, the anchor molds, the maps, the searches, the behavior. But more than anything, they saw the face of a man who never looked afraid, only inconvenienced. Scott's defense tried to paint him as unlucky. They blamed media bias. They said the police wanted it to be him from the beginning. But the defense offered no alternative theory. No explanation for the boat, no logic for the duct tape, the anchors, the bleach in the truck. They suggested Laci had been kidnapped. But no ransom was ever made, no suspect ever found. And when her body washed up precisely where Scott claimed he had been fishing, that argument collapsed. Forensic experts showed how her torso had broken down underwater, consistent with anchor placement on limbs and neck. The prosecution didn't need a video. They had the science, the timeline, and the psychology. When the jury returned, the words were sharp. Guilty of first-degree murder for Laci and second-degree for the death of their unborn son. The courtroom erupted. Some cheered, others cried. Scott stood still, mouth pressed shut. No apology, no reaction, just that same blank calm he wore like armor since the day he killed her. The judge handed down a sentence of death by lethal injection. Scott was sent to San Quentin State Prison, a cell with a view of the same bay where he dumped her. But the story didn't end there. Over the years, Scott Peterson's case became a magnet for debate. Documentaries, podcasts, books. Some argued that the evidence was all circumstantial, that his calm demeanor didn't prove guilt, that the media crucified him. A new wave of supporters emerged online. Free Scott Peterson began trending on forums and Reddit threads. Legal appeals were filed. In 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned his death sentence due to juror bias. Not the guilty verdict, just the method of punishment. He remains in prison for life. But the fact that some people still question his guilt is perhaps the most disturbing twist of all. Because while pundits argued theory, Laci's family buried her. They buried Connor. They buried the future. Her mother still leaves Christmas lights up year-round in her memory. Her father, once so trusting of Scott, has never spoken his name again. And every holiday season, when reruns of the case resurface on cable, when someone new discovers the story on YouTube, her family braces for impact, for another wave of strangers calling her murder a conspiracy. Scott still receives letters, supporters, messages, and every now and then he sends one back. Still calm, still polite, still pretending. But behind that prison door, no one's watching anymore. No cameras, no microphones, just the silence he created on Christmas Eve, the night he ended the woman who loved him, because freedom was more important than family. Scott Peterson thought he could trade a child for a second chance. But the next man didn't want a new life. He wanted control. And when he lost it, he didn't disappear into lies or headlines. He made sure his wife vanished first. There were no bodies, no weapons, no witnesses. Just one man, one perfect lawn, and one woman who never came home again. Drew Peterson wore the uniform of authority, but what he really enforced was fear. A former Bolingbrook, Illinois police sergeant with a polished smile and a badge to match, Drew had built a reputation in town as a charming public servant, but behind closed doors he was a manipulator, a controller, and eventually a killer. His third wife, Kathleen Savio, knew it before anyone else. She had filed for divorce, documented the threats, and told multiple friends she believed Drew would kill her and make it look like an accident. She wasn't paranoid, she was right. Their divorce proceedings were bitter, and Kathleen made it clear she feared for her life. In court documents and handwritten notes, she warned that if she were found dead, it wouldn't be suicide. It would be Drew. But no one listened, and on March 1st, 2004, her body was discovered inside her bathtub, face down, hair soaked, skin cold, no water in the tub. The scene looked wrong, too clean, no blood, no bruising visible at first glance. But when paramedics rolled her over, they noticed a 1-inch laceration on the back of her head and faint bruises on her torso. Still, the Will County coroner, relying on the original autopsy, ruled her death accidental, citing a slip and fall. Drew had an alibi. The door was locked. There was no sign of forced entry. And most disturbingly, he helped manage the scene. As a police officer, he understood how to manipulate evidence, how to touch nothing but guide everything. He spoke confidently, offered theories, pushed the narrative that she had been clumsy. that she probably slipped. No one challenged him. Case closed. But behind that ruling was something darker. Drew had likely staged every inch of that bathroom. Forensic pathologists would later testify that her body was positioned, not found naturally. The laceration on her head was consistent with blunt force trauma, not a fall. The bruises on her abdomen and legs showed she had been grabbed, possibly restrained. There were no signs she had tried to exit the tub, no scuff marks, no overturned items. Her hair wasn't clumped or wet in a way that indicated drowning. It was as if her body had been placed there, and that's what prosecutors would eventually argue, that Drew Peterson killed Kathleen outside the tub, cleaned her body, and then arranged the scene to mimic an accidental slip. No blood in the water, no witnesses, just a man with a badge telling everyone how it happened, and a dead woman who couldn't speak. At the time, he wasn't even questioned as a suspect. He collected life insurance, finalized the divorce posthumously, and moved on to his fourth wife, a younger woman named Laci. But what no one realized in 2004 was that Kathleen wasn't Drew's only secret. She was just the first to die. 3 years after Kathleen Savio's death was quietly labeled an accident and forgotten by the justice system, the woman Drew Peterson called his new wife, 23-year-old Laci Ann Peterson, vanished without a trace. On October 28, 2007, Drew told friends and investigators that Laci had run off with another man, that she'd left him and the kids because she was unstable and selfish. But no one ever heard from her again. No credit card use, no calls, no sightings, no goodbye note, nothing. Just silence. At first, the police weren't alarmed. Drew was one of their own. His word held weight. But Laci's family, especially her sister, knew something was wrong. They described Drew as controlling, possessive, manipulative. Laci had told them she wanted out, that she was planning to leave, that she knew what happened to Kathleen wasn't an accident. And most damning of all, she had told a clergyman she was afraid Drew had killed his third wife. That single admission cracked everything open. The media descended, pressure mounted, and suddenly Kathleen Savio's cold case wasn't closed anymore. Her body was exhumed from her grave, and a second autopsy was performed. This time, the results were clear: homicide, blunt force trauma, staged scene. Kathleen had been murdered, and Drew Peterson was now a suspect not just in a disappearance, but in a confirmed killing. The spotlight turned. Investigators tore through his life. They found Laci's car parked at home, her purse, keys, and phone untouched, her children left behind, her voicemail quiet. It didn't make sense, unless she never left. Police searched nearby lakes, fields, waterways. Cadaver dogs picked up faint hits near canals, but no body was ever found. Still, without a corpse, they couldn't charge Drew for Laci's disappearance. So they built their case backward, through Kathleen. In 2009, Drew was arrested and charged with her murder. The trial wouldn't begin until 2012. But in that time, Drew acted not like a grieving widower or worried husband, but like a local celebrity. He gave interviews, he joked with reporters, he flirted with women online. He even tried to pitch a reality TV show about his life as a single dad. It was a level of arrogance that prosecutors would later call psychopathic. In court, the prosecution relied on forensic pathology and hearsay laws. Statements Kathleen and Laci had made to others before their deaths. The bathtub photos were shown again, the bruises, the bloodless floor, the marks on her scalp. And the critical testimony came from experts who said there was no way she died accidentally in a dry tub with no water, no soap, and no explanation. Witness after witness testified to Drew's history of control, rage, and threats. Kathleen had written a handwritten will saying she feared he would kill her. Laci had told multiple people Drew had threatened her if she ever left. And then there was the final straw, a man who said Drew tried to hire him to kill Kathleen before the accident ever happened. The jury deliberated carefully, and in 2012, Drew Peterson was found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Kathleen Savio. He was sentenced to 38 years in prison, but even behind bars, Drew's control didn't end. In 2015, he was caught conspiring to hire a hitman to kill the prosecutor who put him away. He was recorded on tape inside prison detailing the plan. He was convicted again and given an additional 40 years. As of now, Laci Peterson has never been found. Her disappearance remains open, but her family knows the truth, and so does Drew. When asked by another inmate if he ever felt remorse, he allegedly replied, "You can't regret what never happened. Cold, calculated, and still playing the cop, even after murdering the women who trusted him with their lives." Drew Peterson knew how to clean a scene and hide the truth, but the next man didn't want to hide anything. He didn't fake concern. He didn't give press conferences. He took his girlfriend into the desert, looked her in the eyes, and chose execution. And by the time the cameras caught up to him, the only mystery left was how many people he was willing to bury to protect the lie. Brian Laundrie wasn't famous when he killed her. He didn't have a criminal record, a reputation, or a trail of victims behind him. He was just a quiet 23-year-old with a beard, a sketchbook, and a van. The kind of man you'd see in a parking lot and never remember. But in the summer of 2021, he became one of the most hunted names in America. His face was everywhere. His voice was nowhere. And the girl he said he loved, Gabby Petito, was gone. What started as a couple's dream road trip turned into a national horror story, not because it was sudden, but because the cracks were already there. Gabby was bright, soft-spoken, and free-spirited. She wanted to film their travels, tell their story online, and grow a YouTube audience. Brian, by contrast, seemed withdrawn, temperamental. Friends later said he was controlling. He didn't like the spotlight. He didn't like being challenged. And slowly, over the course of their trip, those traits metastasized into something violent. As they made their way through the American West in a white Ford Transit van, documenting beautiful parks and scenic hikes, the tension off-camera grew. On August 12, 2021, in Moab, Utah, police stopped their van after a 911 caller reported seeing a man slapping a woman. That man was Brian. That woman was Gabby. Officers found her crying hysterically. She admitted they'd been fighting. Brian had scratched her face, but she blamed herself, said she was stressed, that she hit him. The officers separated them for the night, no charges filed, just another fight, another chance to cool off. But that stop was a warning, a crack in the mask. Days later, their posts resumed, scenic, smiling. But behind those photos was something else. Gabby stopped calling her family as often. Her messages sounded off. One text claimed she had no service in Yosemite, a place she wasn't even near. Then, radio silence. Gabby Petito, the girl who documented every step of her journey, vanished, and Brian came home alone. Gabby Petito died face down in the wilderness while the man who killed her walked away without a sound. The official cause was manual strangulation. No weapon, no tool, just hands and intent. Sometime between August 27th and August 30th, 2021, Brian Laundrie grabbed Gabby's neck and squeezed until her airway collapsed. Forensic pathologists said the pressure lasted seconds longer than rage ever should. It was deliberate, sustained, clinical. There were no defensive wounds strong enough to show a fight. He overpowered her. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She likely begged. And still, he kept going. Her remains were later found in the Bridger-Teton National Forest in Wyoming, near their last known campsite. Her body left behind like litter, half covered in brush and debris, as if hiding her was an afterthought. An FBI agent would later say she had been dead for at least 3 weeks when they discovered her. By then, Brian had already returned home to Florida, driving the van they shared, sleeping in a bed they once lay in together, surrounded by people who thought she was still alive. He didn't report her missing. He didn't tell her family what happened. He lawyered up instantly, refusing to speak to law enforcement. He claimed mental distress and hid behind his parents' doors while the rest of the country searched for a missing girl whose killer was already home. Gabby's mother received a text that simply said, "No signal in Yosemite." It was the last message ever sent from Gabby's phone. Investigators believe Brian sent it, a cover text, to buy time. Meanwhile, her family begged the public for help. Find Gabby trended globally. Drones, dogs, and search teams flooded the national parks. And back in Florida, Brian stayed silent. When her body was finally found on September 19, 2021, in a shallow grave near Spread Creek dispersed camping area, the entire country paused. She had been beaten, strangled, left to rot, and the man who killed her had already vanished. Her autopsy revealed chilling details: broken bones in her neck, signs of throttling, and a timeline that matched Brian's sudden solo return. Forensic entomologists studied insects on her body to estimate the time of death. Wildlife had not scattered her. She had been hidden, not well, but just enough for 3 weeks of mystery. But nature eventually revealed what Brian tried to bury. And still, he didn't speak. He simply disappeared. When Brian Laundrie vanished, it didn't feel like a man on the run. It felt like a countdown. On September 13th, 2021, just 2 days before Gabby's remains were discovered, Brian told his parents he was going for a hike in the Carlton Reserve near their Northport, Florida home. He walked into 25,000 acres of swampland, armed with a backpack, a notebook, and a plan. The world didn't know yet that Gabby was dead, but Brian did. And as the manhunt exploded across news cycles, he said nothing. Not to the FBI, not to Gabby's family, not even to his parents. He vanished into the marsh like he had rehearsed it. For weeks, the reserve was combed by airboats, dive teams, dogs, and helicopters. Tips poured in from across the country. Sightings were reported in the Carolinas, on the Appalachian Trail, in Mexico. None were real. Meanwhile, his parents gave no answers. Their son had walked into a swamp and never returned. They said they were worried, that they didn't know anything. Public outrage grew. Protesters camped outside their house. Every hour that passed without a body, his or Gabby's, made things worse. But on October 20th, 2021, the search ended. Investigators found skeletal remains in the reserve, submerged in floodwaters that had recently receded. Alongside the bones were a dry bag, a revolver, and a waterlogged notebook. Dental records confirmed it was Brian Laundrie. He had shot himself in the head. The notebook, partially legible despite the water, contained a brief, chilling confession. In it, Brian admitted to killing Gabby. He claimed it was merciful, that she had been injured, and he ended her suffering. He apologized to her family, to his own. Then, with a single round, he ended the story, on his terms. No trial, no justice, just a swamp, a note, and a gun. The FBI later closed the case, stating that Brian was solely responsible for Gabby's death. But the details he took with him, the argument that sparked it, the full timeline, the moment he decided to kill her, all of it vanished with the bullet. He didn't leave a video. He didn't leave coordinates. Just ink and bones. Gabby Petito became a household name in death. Brian Laundrie became a symbol, not just of domestic violence, but of how charm, silence, and access can delay the truth. The country mourned her. Tributes poured in. Her parents turned grief into advocacy, launching foundations, giving interviews, warning others. Brian's parents remained quiet. They buried their son in private. No headstone, no eulogy. Just a quiet end to a boy who killed with his hands, lied with his eyes, and walked away as if none of it mattered. And to this day, the question still echoes through every interview, every documentary, every grieving voice. What did Gabby say in those final seconds? And why didn't Brian stop? Some killers run, some confess, but all of them leave behind one thing: silence. Not the kind that heals, the kind that haunts. 5 women trusted the wrong man, and each paid for it with the last breath he decided they didn't deserve.